And I'm also going to be recording on here on my laptop.
And I just got the alert. All right. And then Joe will be back. Oh, hi, Danielle. She's connecting her audio.
You already have 25 people in here. Happy Thursday, everybody.
Yes. Welcome for everyone in here. All right. So pretty much we'll give it one more minute. Joe will be back soon, and then I'll get us all kicked off. I feel like I should have some elevator music playing.
Only at this point I start freestyling, you know.
I mean, do you have bars?
I can do a little Biggie, you feel me? But I don't want to do it at this moment. I'm shy.
You're like, not on the spot, not on the spot. Oh, goodness. And then Joe will be back shortly. Oh, see, spoken into existence.
Yep, I was on mute and I heard you. I said, I'm coming soon. And then I realized that you could not hear me.
All right, so as people filter in, I just wanted to say hi, everybody. As everyone's piling into the room and becoming situated, I'd like to take a moment to say thank you all for registering and joining for today's conversation. Working at Percent Pledge, our focus is building a community of and for people wanting to do good and make an empathetic, genuine social impact. So no, I mean it from my heart when I say thank you so much for making the time to be here. And at the end of this webinar, there'll be a survey. So if you can provide feedback or thoughts, I'll be eternally grateful. The entire team will be extremely grateful. And with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Joel, who would then kick us off and introduce our wonderful panelists.
Thank you very much, Prince. Hi, everyone. My name is Joel Pollack. I'm the founder and CEO of Percent Pledge. And I think we covered a lot of the kind of intro of what we do with Prince's quick brief. But I think, yeah, to provide any additional context on us and why we exist to make social impact programs customizable and affordable for businesses of any size. So whether that's volunteer programs and now a lot of virtual volunteering or matching donations or nonprofit partnerships, we exist to provide not only technology, but our team of philanthropy experts to help you engage your employees in giving and make it easy for them to bring their favorite causes to the office with them, even if that office is their apartment during this new normal. And to kick it off, I'm going to introduce each of our panelists very briefly here. Also, when we were doing the run of show and kind of a planning session earlier, KP, one of our panelists, suggested that we do an icebreaker, which I took way too seriously. And so I'm gonna kick off by introducing each of them. KP, the community and culture specialist at G2. We also have Meriem, senior manager, social impact at VMware, and Lilly as well as senior manager, social impact at Cloudera. Three amazing women who are going to bring a lot of diverse perspectives, experiences, thoughts, insights to the conversation, and so to get going with the icebreaker, I This is also optional because we maybe didn't give as much notice as we would have liked, but if each of our panelists has some sort of piece of paper and a writing utensil in front of them, what we're going to ask is to do your best sketch of a helicopter dropping off something to one of our other panelists. So I'm going to get it going and start. If you can see that here, I've got my helicopter that is dropping off.
I can see your fingers, but your background is blocked. Ooh, I see it. Bring it in a little bit closer. Do it again. Do it again. Push it a little bit more.
Better?
No.
So I've got a helicopter here that's dropping off 3 top candidates to KP because you mentioned that G2 is hiring right now. So with that, I will hand it over to you to introduce yourself a little bit more and then pass it along to either Meriem or Lilly.
All right. Well, this is a fun icebreaker, which shows how I'm not that good at drawing. So what you'll see is a cloud and looks like Totoro next to it. But for those who are into anime, but it's a helicopter. But moving into something I'm better with, which is talking about myself. So for introduction, hello, everyone. I'm Kirstin Powdrill, but you can call me KP. As Joel greatly mentioned, I work at G2.com. We're a global software company. So we have offices in the US, in London, Singapore, as well as in India. I've been at G2, about to be celebrating 2 years. So I'm a part of our employee success team. As you can see from this beautiful backdrop, I live in Chicago, as well as I'm very thankful to support 2 great programs at G2. So the first one is focused on philanthropy, which is called G2 Gives. And that is really using some operational things that we have, which is focused on reviews, software reviews. And so it was a part of our initial business model where individuals, you could do a review on Adobe or a review on any software we're using, and you could get a $10 gift card. But then as we evolve, we figure out how to transition that into an option for you to give that money back as a donation to nonprofits. So G2 Gives is one program that I get to manage, as well as the second is focused on DEI. And that program is called G2 Together. And it's all about community. It is made up of our employee resource groups, our DEI council, which is called G2 Together Ambassadors. And we have seen it grown in such a capacity during a pandemic that allows 415 employees to be able to understand the importance of celebrating who they are as individuals, knowing that in addition to their performance, we really take great pride in who they are as it pertains to their gender, to their identities of ethnicity, to any causes that they have in mind. So again, I'm KP, I work at G2. I'm the community and culture specialist, and I'm very pleased to be speaking with Lilly, Meriem, and Percent Pledge. So I'll pass the mic over to Meriem.
Thank you, KP. And I'm a little bit embarrassed to show my helicopter. It looks a bit like a bird, but it was dropping flowers to KP because I was counting on our flowers and we were talking about the advent of spring. And so there you go. So hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. Eid Mubarak for those that are celebrating today. My name is Meriem Bekka. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Senior Manager of Social Impact at VMware, where I have been working for going on 6 years. So at VMware, I have done a lot of work around our citizen philanthropy programs, which are really around encouraging VMware people to be active and engaged citizens in their community of choice. And so VMware doesn't support any specific issue or nonprofits or cause areas, but it's really about empowering each of our people to be active in their communities that they're most passionate about. And these days, or really over the past 3 or so years, I've been leading our portfolio of programs focused on nonprofit digital transformation. So how we can use our core strengths and competencies as a company. So for those of you that might not be familiar with VMware, we are a multi-cloud SaaS company that really supports our customers in their digital transformation journeys. So how we can apply those skills and those strengths to the nonprofit sector. And thank you so much for Percent Pledge and Prince for curating this panel. I'm thrilled to be here with KP and Lilly. And with that, I will pass it over to Lilly.
Thank you, Meriem. Thank you, KP. Actually, Meriem, I did the same thing for my drawing. I drew a helicopter dropping flowers, and it was because of that conversation. But I would say it's for KP and Meriem. So the flowers are for both of you, and to welcome spring. So I'm Lilly Giraldo. I am the Senior Manager for Employee Giving and Volunteering at Cloudera. At Cloudera, our CSR program is called Cloudera Cares, and that's essentially the program that I've managed. I've been doing it for 3 years now, and actually helped build it from scratch. Prior to that, it was a very kind of informal employee-led and run program. And so I came in and expanded it. And so right now, Cloudera Cares covers some of the traditional CSR programs. So we have a donation matching program. We offer, when it was possible, we did in-person volunteering for our different offices across the globe, because Cloudera is about 3,000 employees spread across the US and internationally. We have an annual day of service. We've done that for 3 years in a row. Last year, we went all virtual. And then the final piece that we have, and I'll be talking about it a little bit more later, is a Cloudera Cares nonprofit speaker series where we invite different nonprofits to come and present and share with our employees. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I guess we can kind of just dive in. Lilly, since you're the last one to speak, I'd love to just hear why DEI is important to you, and just how do you make it stick, or how do you plan to make it stick for the Cloudera team?
Absolutely. So been thinking about this, and honestly, the kind of easiest answer is that for me, it's personal. And I think it probably starts that way for a lot of folks. I'm Latina. I'm first generation American. Both my parents are immigrants from Colombia. And so one thing I've noticed, and it's something that has become more apparent to me as I've gotten older and just had more time, is that there is a lot of situations where I feel like I am the only Latina in the room, and not just the only Latina, sometimes the only person of color in the room. This is starting out from the town that I grew up in, where I went to school, all the way through where I work now. And like I said, when I was younger, it just seemed like the norm. As I've gotten older, I'm realizing, why aren't there more folks like me in positions, in these spaces that I occupy? And so I really started questioning it. I don't think that I'm that unusual or that special. I think oftentimes, employers fall back on the idea that it's a pipeline problem. I just know that's not true. I know there's so many wonderful, fabulous folks that are just looking for the opportunity. So for me, I kind of started thinking about, well, what can I do? And I will say one approach is kind of a personal approach again, which is what are the things that I can do? And honestly, sometimes just being me in the spaces that I occupy is a statement in and of itself. You might not see a lot of folks that look like me. I've also been very, very proud of my identity and my culture. I've never turned it down. I always felt like there was a pressure to maybe kind of turn it down a little bit. I'm always sharing my story when I have the opportunity. And then I think another piece that I've done throughout my career, I think it's maybe being more accepted now as times change and there's more awareness, but oftentimes I was the one challenging the status quo or kind of bringing up these uncomfortable truths. And I still continue to do that. Sometimes folks listen, other times it's just met with non-interest. And I think the latest thing that well, not latest, but what I've been trying to do even more now is just pull in more folks that look like me and share similar experiences and bring them in as allies and spotlight them in as many ways as I can. I always think, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could look out where I am and see folks that look like me and share similar experiences to what I have. So that's why DEI is important to me. And it influences everything I do and influences the work that I do on social impact at Cloudera.
Awesome. Is that how you bring in the culture of DEI and embed into the company's DNA, by just having those speakers come in and the higher practice as well? Like when there's allyship conversations needed to be have, are you bringing them in to like internally instead of just keeping them on external?
I mean, right now so I'm not part of the DE&I team at Cloudera, and I think they kind of have what they're working on. I think for me, it's more spotlighting them when I can with things like the speaker series, but also for me, it also means, social impact has a natural alignment with DE&I programs. And so whenever I can align, it makes total sense to do it, because the causes that I might be focusing on are also very important to the LGBTQ plus ERG, or when their Pride is coming. So those are things that I'm always trying to do, and reaching out to them. I might be Latina, that doesn't mean I understand the experience of someone who's Black or someone, and so I need to also reach out to them as well.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Lily, and also, I guess, for being to a certain extent the guinea pig of taking on the first question in this discussion. And the next question that we had and wanted to talk about, to provide some context, was one actually that gets at some of what you mentioned, and so I would love for KP to take kind of the initial pass at sharing some insight on this question. And Lily, you mentioned the importance of sharing your experience, which is diverse in and of itself, but also then having other folks that are diverse sharing their experiences. And recently, when we were doing an interview with Cheryl Grant, who's a DE&I expert and supports companies implementing these programs, that difference between education and experience was an insight that really popped from that conversation of, it's one thing to know something, it's another thing to feel it. And her point was, let's have education be the starting point, and let's have that set the table. But then where we're actually really going to see the movement and the growth when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion is having team members from completely different backgrounds who have completely different lived experiences, sharing that with their colleagues. And so KP, I would love to get I suppose your feedback or take on that sort of assertion of maybe starting with education, but really growing with experience. And if you've seen any difference between those two and in any of your work at G2.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd love to answer this question about education experience as it pertains to DEI. But before going into like the corporate mindset of it, I'll give a little background on myself. African-American female from Chicago, but had the opportunity to also live overseas. Degree in international business. So I've lived in South Korea, I lived in Spain, lived in Houston and Chicago. And what helps in all of those different experiences is respecting people and like sharing stories, as well as Lily mentioned, right? And so I took that like natural passion with connecting with people and respecting individuals now into my current role as community and culture specialist. And so my experiences, as well as other G2 experiences, we get to share with this really great program that I created last year after the murder of George Floyd, which is called a live chat. And the live chat really leans on focusing on a G2er, talking about their cultural background, what they do at the company, and really moving from the notion of you're just my coworker, but you're an actual person. So where you're from, your experiences and all of those things, really make you stand out. And it also sometimes may make me uncomfortable to say, maybe I need to check some stereotypes that I may have had or unconscious biases, right? So with that storytelling within the live chats, it's created like a really vulnerable space for G2ers, an honest space, something better than what you can do with just a Google search. So when I shared my live chat, it was focused on my experience as a Black woman in my professional career within Chicago. So some things I educated like my coworkers on is like Black hair, right? Of how I've been working in HR for 7 years, but it's a big part of my identity. And sometimes I didn't feel as safe to express myself with my hair, right? So it's like little nuggets that you share, and it's really more easier to receive when you hear it from like your coworker. As well as in the live chats, we have like photos in there. There's video of education about like the history of the Black Belt in Chicago, Bronzeville, which is where my mother's from. And so we find like really organic ways to have those conversations. And over time, it may lead to like a one-on-one conversation with a coworker. So the live chats is one example of how we do authentic storytelling at G2. A second thing is, as we celebrate different themes throughout the year, such as right now in May, we're celebrating Mental Health Month and Asian Pacific Islander Month. So we try to provide resources within our ERGs, for all of our employees. So it's maybe like, you should watch or listen to this, or here's an article Yesterday in our Asian Pacific Islander ERG, it's like, well, can you name an Asian individual? Because studies show that it's very hard for Americans to recognize people outside of Jackie Chan and like Bruce Lee. So we had this whole conversation highlighting different Asians who either inspire us or in the tech field. So education we do in different ways, right? Some of it's formal of a guide, others is in conversation. And then over time, we see that we're creating a learning community and a safe community to where we want to attract more individuals who are different and intelligent to join G2.
That is, that's amazing. And thank you for sharing. And one item that you mentioned with, or maybe in that example with the live chat is the idea of spaces and creating safe spaces for team members. And Prince, you and I were on with Table XI, another Chicago-based company and one of our best customers, and talking about their diversity and inclusion team and how they melded it with the social impact program that we run with them, and allowing each individual to donate and showcase their favorite charity or cause on their pledge portal, on their giving platform, and that their point was exactly about those safe spaces, that they had done the work through their diversity and inclusion program where, you know, for so many of us, the causes that we support are such a close representation of who we are as a person, and that they felt comfortable. I think it was Kara on their team who said, you know, some of my other companies, I wouldn't have felt comfortable supporting Black trans-led nonprofits through our workplace giving program, but Table XI has created that culture and done the work up front where I feel safe to bring that into the workplace. And so I just wanted to highlight that notion of spaces. It's I think really important.
That's important that you mentioned that and bring that up, Joel. Because I know that for a company that's 30,000 employees, that can become a little bit more muddy and a lot more complicated. So Meriem, I know at VMware there's like 30,000 plus of you all, and you have different branches, one for DEI and social impact. So how do you all work together and just encourage DEI when you're going forward? Do you have favorite nonprofits? Are these nonprofits highlighting the inequities that are compounded within certain causes, like the minorities within the minorities?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we are at VMware, we're nearing the 35,000 mark of people. And so our approach with our kind of employee and community driven social impact program is rooted in citizen philanthropy. So like I said earlier, the mission of citizen philanthropy is to encourage and inspire every VMware person to be active and engaged citizen in their community. So when we use the word citizen, it's really about that interconnectedness that we all have to our community. We believe that, you know, all of our well-being is interwoven. And when we use the word philanthropy, I know that it can be a loaded word these days, but when we use the word philanthropy, we're taking it back to the original meaning, which is love of humankind. And so when, you know, I love what KP was saying about having kind of real life experiences that shape, you know, your respect for other groups and other people, because one of the core principles of citizen philanthropy, which I feel really supports principles around DEI as well, is experiential learning. And so at VMware, we believe that, you know, 70% of our learning as adults happens experientially, 20% happens in peer-to-peer settings, and then 10% happens in a classroom kind of unilateral education setting. And so we really want people to be able to get out there, be in their communities, and learn firsthand from their communities. And so one of our flagship programs is called Service Learning. We intentionally call it service learning and not volunteering because we really kind of believe in that idea that whenever you enter a service opportunity with the mindset to learn, with a sense of humility, that it can be really an opportunity for growth. And people have 40 paid hours a year that they can use anytime, you know, whether all in 1 week or 1 hour a week, to serve in their communities of choice. And we're really flexible with that. You know, it doesn't always have to be with a registered nonprofit. We had, you know, last year as a lot of protests were happening, if folks were supporting organizing protests or handing out or, you know, running a first aid booth during a protest, they could also log that as service learning time. And again, it's about giving people an opportunity for experiential learning. And then kind of like the key to that, so the secret sauce to experiential learning is in reflection. So reflection unlocks the key to experiential learning. And so giving people the opportunity afterwards, you know, like we're talking about in spaces, either in groups or, you know, within we have like an internal social media thing, we call it social, where people can type, you know, what did I learn? What surprised me? And so I think coming away from just like, I helped them, and, you know, that savior mentality that sometimes people can have around service, to know, what did you learn from that experience? What surprised you? What was different? What didn't you expect? And overall, we feel like that really helps people, you know, practice that sense of empathy, build a sense of self-awareness. And I love, Aiko Bethea was interviewed by Brene Brown recently, and she spoke about the importance of relational change over transactional change.
Yes.
You know, it's not just that one time, that 1 hour I did this thing. It's about building a practice over time. And so we really try to encourage that idea of, you know, having it be part of it doesn't have to be everyday life, but like, you know, part of a continuous thing that you're doing, and not just a one-time thing that we curate for you. So, you know, our DEI and social impact teams work very closely together. Like you said, we are separate functions, but, you know, both of our teams recognize how, I think Lilly said this earlier, how both of these functions are really quite interconnected and complementary of each other. So we work really closely together and continue to find ways that our work complements each other.
Yes, I love that. I love all of that. I'm a huge Brene Brown fan, so I definitely know that quote. And you know, I'm gonna kind of put everybody on the hot seat here, because let's be honest. It's not easy building out these programs, and oftentimes the people who are trying to build these programs out in the beginning do not have the support or the resources or the tools, and there's a lot of roadblocks. So if, like, I don't know, KP, if you want to start with just sharing some of the roadblocks that you found when you're like including DEI into social impact and that effort.
Yeah, so I will say, since the programs, like our philanthropy program is already set in stone, like that one was established, like G Tours, they love to give back locally, regionally, fundraising, all of that good stuff. So the part of putting those two together, especially like when we were celebrating Breast Cancer Awareness Month in October, to not only fundraise, but have that awareness portion of the disproportionate health access for African American women, as well as women in India. And the way we were able to get through that roadblock of conversations, if we had already been embedded in the thought of like, what is equity, right? What is intersectionality? Like, what is our purpose and our impact? So also with that, it was the topic of being uncomfortable, having uncomfortable conversations, right? As we look at like the demographics of a lot of tech companies, it's going to be small percentages of minorities. So like creating that space of where we can have these conversations to say, if we're giving back to a charity, like really what's that purpose? Are we really putting all of our resources in the best spaces? And so this year we actually evolved our philanthropy program from 3 orgs that we support to a total of 11. And that was done with the help of G Tours across the globe. So we reached out to our APAC team, like, what are some charities that you really are like focused on? We added those. Same thing for London, and same thing for the US. So I wouldn't call it a roadblock, but an opportunity for improvement to evolve. As well as another thing was just language, right? Language is always something that allows us to learn an opportunity. So for myself, I may use some slang words, and I give my teammates the power to say, like, if you don't understand, please let me know, right? So language, evolving our program. You did also mention resources. So specifically like our employee resource groups, we now have a budget for them this year. We have a total of 8 ERGs ranging from ethnicity to our queer community to our veterans group. So making sure that they have the funds to be able to set up like volunteer projects they would like to have, or pay for a guest speaker, or do a giveaway prize. So it's growing over time. And then the big thing is keeping people energized behind it. Like, as I believe Meriem said, like, it's not something that you can get perfectly done. You don't have to like commit 40 hours per week. It's like that reflection period. Are you showing up in attendance? If you're a manager, are you giving your employees the space and time for volunteering or for attending some of these events? So it really is a community effort for us to get this buy-in, and over time it's getting better and better.
Yes. Lilly, you're like, you just jumped into the Cloudera space as an employee. Like, what are some roadblocks that you may foresee, or that you've already ran into, or if there are any?
Well, I would say, I think generally with CSR, and I've heard this from other folks too, sometimes some of the roadblocks you might hit with the CSR program is maybe a lack of buy-in sometimes from senior leadership, right? So have seen that. I think the other thing that I've seen, and sometimes too, maybe kind of the mid-level manager, maybe not giving folks the time to volunteer, or that becoming an issue. And that's happened. And I think it happens to a lot of folks. I think another piece about that too is sometimes senior leaders, especially with DE&I or with some of the organizations that we've brought in, I think maybe there's a discomfort talking about some of the issues. And so I've definitely seen hesitancy, or they look maybe like they've been put on the spot. And so I've seen that a little bit as well. But to that, I'll say, I think we all run into that as well. You don't want to stick your foot in your mouth and then you're very worried about saying the wrong thing or not fully understanding the situation. But we have definitely come across that, where we are expecting kind of a longer statement from someone, and it was clear that they weren't quite sure what to say. So those are a couple of roadblocks that I've seen.
Nice. And Meriem, can I put you on that hot spot?
Sure. Yeah. What KP and Lilly shared, it definitely resonates with me. And there's probably just two things I would add. The first might be a little bit unusual for this kind of panel, but I would say people defaulting to philanthropy to trying to solve some deeper systemic DEI challenges. Mm-hmm. So while I think that philanthropy can be a really important component of supporting DEI strategy, there also needs to be policy. There needs to look at, is there representation at a leadership level on organizational boards? What kind of trainings are happening? What kind of practice is happening in the day-to-day of the organization? So just recognizing that it's part of a larger holistic strategy, and, writing a check once to one organization is not necessarily gonna solve your DEI challenges. So that would be one thing. And then the other, that I see in the social impact space, and that translates into DEI as well, is what I've heard called an action bias. So whenever people start to become aware of challenges around systemic inequities in social impact and DEI, of wanting to immediately take action, and coming from a place of really good intent, just wanting to do something to help. And I recently heard, I was watching a YouTube video of a talk with leader Stacey Abrams, and she had such a great analogy, so I'm going to borrow it, where she said, it's like seeing someone and their car broke down on the side of the road and driving right past them to the gas station, filling up a barrel of gas and going back and giving them the barrel of gas and feeling really good about yourself because you got them some gas, when it turns out their tire blown out, and so I think it's about coming from a place of good intent, but recognizing like there's an opportunity to gain a better understanding of some of these challenges, and really sitting with the problem and the challenge to be able to build solutions that are going to be effective and long-term and meaningful. So those are the the two challenges I sometimes see in this work that I would add to the conversation.
That's incredible. Thank you for that ad, Meriem. And one of the items that sort of relates to that we talk to a lot with our customers is the notion of authenticity. And if you take an action too quickly without kind of being thoughtful about it, your community, whether that's your employees or your broader community, they can sniff it out pretty easily. And if we want to be more authentic with this, that it's okay to take a step back and have kind of some of that thought ahead of action. And two other items that I just was taking notes on from Lilly and KP, and then Lilly, I'm going to turn it back over to you on question 5. KP, what you mentioned on the distinction between roadblock versus area for improvement, and it was someone the other day that I was saying, we had recently grown a lot, but we have all this area we want to go, and they stopped me and said, no, it's an and, it's not a but. And I think that is maybe a good way to think about this, because this work is hard, and that if you have put in the work and you've gotten to maybe a speed bump or just identified an area of improvement, it's an and. It's not, oh, we've done all this, but now we have to go back or do these other items, celebrating where you have come and understanding that now you get to go do even better. And Lilly, what you mentioned on that notion of a lot of this work is maybe counterintuitive, like discomfort is good, but it is not comfortable by definition. And so how do we gather employees together and create these spaces like we talked about earlier? How do we make sure that folks are okay to be vulnerable and okay to kind of feel not the most comfortable if it's a topic that is important and something that might run against status quo, or should be talked about to potentially change status quo. On this next question, I wanted to ask you about, Lilly. One of the items that we keep running into in that intersection of diversity, inclusion, and social impact is that so many of our customers want to blend their diversity and inclusion efforts into their social impact programs and are trying to think through tactically how best to do that. And it seems like there's two camps that we've heard out of the gate, which is, diversity and inclusion in itself could be, a charitable cause. It could be a focus area of your philanthropic efforts, of your giving program, or it could be something that is more so blended in and spread across all of your focuses, whether it's, if you're focused on education, or if you're a healthcare company and you want to focus on health equity and trying to weed out healthcare deserts, then that could very well be something where that DE&I focus is embedded into that focus on healthcare. So I was hoping to get your take, and I know we spoke a little bit about the speaker series. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned, so at Cloudera, there is a separate DE&I program, and there's a separate social impact program called Cloudera Cares. But I absolutely, and I'm kind of managing the Cloudera Cares part, but I absolutely, as I've said, there should be alignment and there's absolutely overlap. So that's one thing. I think the other piece too is a way that we were able to build in some of the DE&I into our social impact program was this, I've mentioned it, this Cloudera Cares speaker series. And so, and this was, the program was, we developed it last year, and it was in response to COVID, because typically folks would be doing in-person volunteering and that just wasn't possible. And so we wanted to offer a way for employees to continue learning about nonprofits and to continue engaging with Cloudera Cares. But we also really did it because we kept hearing about how much nonprofits were struggling, right? So it was a situation where they were maybe losing funding, and at the same time, there was a surge in demand for their services. And so we kicked off the speaker series last year, actually last April. We've had about 20 different speakers, and there are a couple of things that kind of define the speaker series. So basically we invite nonprofits to come in and for a half hour, do a presentation and share their mission with employees. It's a bi-weekly thing. It's a low lift for employees because really they can tune in and listen and learn. But I think some of the defining characteristics of the speaker series, number one, is that it's covered a wide range of topics, and it's both US and international organizations. Cloudera is a global company. And really the sessions, and because it's a wide range of topics, a lot of them are very eye-opening and educational. Like Meriem was talking about learning, and that really is what it is. Like a lot of tech companies, a lot of the folks come from places of privilege, and so they may not even be aware that this is a problem. For example, we had someone from the Urban Institute come and talk about the history of redlining in the US. And there are people that didn't know that that was a policy that happened. So that was one thing. And then the second piece of it, and this is something that I deliberately did, I really wanted to ensure that we had a diverse roster of speakers. So and so again, it's a personal thing. I want to bring in as many folks as I can. And so over the course of it, I, looked at the roster and then thought, where can I fill in the gaps? I made a concerted effort, I think, too, to find these speakers to look outside of some of my networks, because I think we all know if you keep pulling from the same network and that network that you have lacks diversity, then you're just going to keep pulling in the same folks. So kind of looking at outside my networks for the speakers to pull in. And then also looking at a lot of smaller nonprofits. I think, for the speaker series, we could have gone to a lot of the bigger players that folks know about and that are well known, but I think we also understand that oftentimes they're white-led. So I started pulling from smaller nonprofits that work in the communities, know the landscape, and are oftentimes Black and brown led. I think also to bring in all those diverse speakers meant, even for me, and I think it did this too for the employees who were tuning in, we had to kind of expand our notion of what a leader or an expert looks like. I think in our minds, we think they have to look a certain way. And so even I had to get over it. And so it meant bringing in more women or even younger women, or honestly, people from other countries with accents. We might think, and so those were all the kind of things that I was thinking about. And I think the other piece is when we kicked off the speaker series in April, Cloudera itself it was still kind of working on expanding its DE&I program. And especially with everything that happened and with the murder of George Floyd, it pushed them to start beefing it up more quickly. But when I started, it wasn't quite in place. And so I kind of found this non-traditional route to bring in more diverse speakers to Cloudera, because like a lot of tech companies, it's mainly male, not a lot of diversity. And so I thought this is the indirect route to bring in folks and show everyone that. And I think the last thing I'll say, I feel like I'm rambling, but the last thing I'll say too is we make a small donation to all the organizations that participate to recognize their time. And then we always encourage employees to take advantage of their donation match if they're interested.
Hey, I love that.
That is that is incredible insight. And what you mentioned, two things that stuck out as you were talking. One about that commitment to making the speaker series more diverse, and one that it's just table stakes. Like in that conversation I mentioned with Cheryl Grant earlier, she was sharing examples about how she's walked into multiple companies and their diversity and inclusion committee was 10 white people, and that you can be as educated on the topic as possible, but if you don't have diverse perspectives at the table, then it's going to be difficult to drive at the difference that you want to create. And then also that notion of the power of education in those speaker series. Like we've run into that a lot, and had a lot of success this past year, where all of the the volunteering we've been doing is virtual. And so often people think of volunteering as, oh, we're going to go bring a team and paint a wall somewhere or do a beach cleanup. And those are all perfectly fine examples, but also something like a climate education session, or bringing in speakers like the series that you're doing. Even if it's more of a passive service experience, it can be profoundly successful. And I wanted to switch over to the last question here for Meriem, and talking through the results you've seen from both the diversity, equity, inclusion, social impact programs at VMware, and then also was curious to get your thoughts related to this question, to bring back something you mentioned earlier, is where does each program sit within your organization, and does that feel right now, or if you had a magic wand, would you change that at all?
Yeah, so I'll start there because so our team just recently underwent a bit of an organizational change, the social impact team. And we were previously sitting within human resources, and now we sit within the office of the CTO, so our chief technology officer. And the reason for that is because we created a new there's a lot of offices. So there's a new office of ESG, which is environmental social governance. And that office is tasked with guiding the entire company towards our 2030 goals. So it's 30 objectives we have that are leading to 3 outcomes of trust, equity, and sustainability. And so our work is very much interlinked with the DEI team, which sits within human resources. And so I would say that, you know, as far as our teams working together, not to be corny, but we're obviously stronger when we're working together. And so I absolutely believe that. And I think that our programs are so much stronger with, you know, our teams have really good relationships and are able to collaborate in a variety of ways. And in terms of the impact that we see from that, I would say internally, it's really about shifting the culture for our organization. You know, I love how Lilly started of saying, you know, around why DEI is important to her, and saying that it's personal. And I think it has to be personal for people, for us really to start to see change. People have to know why they're doing this. Like I said earlier, if it's a checkbox, if it's transactional, then there's not going to be that sustained change and that sustained impact. And so the kind of culture change that we see with our programs contributing to DE&I is providing people those opportunities to engage in their communities, to be in different circumstances that they can then bring back to our organization. So I just, as an example, I read a reflection from one of our employees who sits on a nonprofit board. And they were sharing that as a nonprofit board, they have to make a lot of decisions and they do not always agree. And it's really hard because everyone has a different opinion. But recognizing that everyone is working towards that shared common objective. And they're actually a new manager at VMware. And so they were saying that as a new manager, they're able to take those experiences of not always having everyone on your team agree, having very different opinions, and being able to create space for people who have different opinions, different points of views, recognizing that we're all working towards a common objective and how to manage kind of those diverging viewpoints. So that's just one example of kind of the culture shift that you can influence in terms of the behaviors and attitudes internally. And then I would say that externally, the impact that we're able to have is really around our collective impact of seeing many employees working together towards common objectives. And so one example of that we've seen over the past year or so, many of our different power of difference communities, so that's what we call our BRG, ERG groups, there are power of difference communities. Many of them have created funds, which are groupings of different nonprofits that they can support. And so really kind of leaning on those groups to choose the organizations that they feel resonate most with their demographics. So we have social justice funds for our Latino, for our Black, Pride, women, veteran, disabled pods, and people from all across the company see this as an opportunity to contribute and, you know, to really support organizations that are chosen by those groups. And so I really love this because I feel like our citizen philanthropy approach allows us to take an employee-led approach where I, Meriem, personally would not necessarily know or be able to choose all of the organizations that are best going to support different groups and demographics. And, you know, while I can be a sounding board, I usually lean on them, you know, let me know what would work best with for your teams and what aligns with your mission. So I think, and, you know, those are just two examples, but I really feel that the ripple effect of kind of, you know, even if the two aren't completely merged of, you know, I know in a lot of organizations, these are separate teams, and I personally think that they should be, of, you know, as we've said throughout, that there's absolutely a lot of interplay. There's definitely like a Venn diagram there. And so just making sure that there's an alignment with the teams, because I absolutely think that DEI and social impact teams are better off when working together.
I love that. Yes, thank you so much. That was such a beautiful response. And you're right. Well, I don't want to take up too much time. I know that there's a few people who may have questions or have already asked questions. I see a few here. So starting with the first question, are we able to put this up? All right.
I think we can just maybe.
Yeah, so like, first question, free reign, whoever wants to answer, like, what's the first step you think is key that a company needs to undertake to get started on their DEI work? And if they don't already have a formal program in place?
Thank you, Jimmy, for the question.
All right, hey, Jimmy Rose, I'll go first at this. And the answer is there is no right answer. And the reason I say that is like companies are different, the demographics are different, they're different focuses. So at G2, our program started grassroots, to be honest. So when I started as an executive assistant, there was already like a small group of our G2 Together leadership team who would write like blog posts about different holidays around the globe. So we started really small just to get even education started there. And over time, we evolved into having our ERGs. And it wasn't a big focus to say, we need 50 ERGs by the end of the year. It was like our women's group was a really big group that expressed interest in having more space to celebrate like Women's History Month, to do like a bake sale. So these things started happening organically. What I will say is important for whatever recipe that you use is buy-in from your senior leadership team, as Meriem pointed to before about those policies. Like, do you have benefits for your parents? Do you have health benefits for your queer group and your trans group and all of these things? So what we say at G2, and even when I listen to in podcasts and things of that sort, is it's everyone's job with DEI. So whatever formula you use, it should be intentional. It should have buy-in from managers, from ICs, from senior leadership, and give yourself time for that journey, because it's not like you'll come up with a perfect recipe in 1 year. And then the biggest piece of advice is like, don't be afraid to start somewhere, because as you're living in that fear, there are people who probably don't feel like they're in a belonging space and they may leave. And one of the biggest costs for companies is turnover. So being really intentional with whatever formula that is, and just having more than one mind at the table as we talk about like different perspectives and things of that sort.
Thank you, KP. And Jimmy, if you're still in here, hopefully he didn't drop after the first sentence, because there was a ton of good stuff in there. And just a few other items that come to mind from some of the interviews we've done with D&I leaders, because that's not our area of expertise necessarily, but in speaking to folks, having employees incentivized, as KP mentioned, it's a practice, not a program. And so once you do these trainings, if employees just view this as another to-do item, on their already full plate of responsibilities, then there isn't going to be that follow through. And so can you tie whatever you want your objectives of your D&I program as you build it out, can you tie that to business outcomes so that people are incentivized to really create the change that you want to see? And then one of the other items that we talked about or that KP mentioned is, don't be afraid to start. And even an example like that, we've talked to plenty of companies that they don't want to necessarily look back over time and do like an audit of their hiring data or anything like that, because that fear of, oh shit, what if it looks really bad? And if it looks really bad, that's okay, because it's about moving forward. So the other piece of advice that we've heard from a lot of folks is for programs like these, build it and design it based on the future as opposed to the past. Oftentimes we look to the past to say, hey, how should we do something differently? And don't forget about the past or history. But when building out a program like this, maybe look and say, okay, take a futurist approach. What do we want our company, our culture, our employee base to look like in 1 year, in 3 years? And then how do we design a program that creates that future, as opposed to trying to kind of create a program that's just running away from a past? Hopefully that wasn't too meta. But the other thing I wanted to check in quickly with KP and Lilly, that same question of where these programs live within your organization. It's one that we get quite often. So maybe Lilly, if I could start with you, where within Cloudera does the social impact and the D&I programs live, and does that feel right to you?
Yeah, so our social impact program is under the marketing team, actually, which is not that unusual, but it's a little bit of a change for me. But it's under the marketing team and kind of marketing communications, and that does make sense because so much of what we're doing is trying to reach out to employees. So to work within that team has been a nice change for me to have that. The DE&I team falls under actually kind of falls under HR, but the person who leads it is they're almost like their own kind of separate function within HR. Yeah.
And KP, what about you?
Pretty similar to Lilly as far as on the HR side of things. So both programs, G2 Gifts and G2 Together, live underneath like the employee success budget. And I'm like our main contact for that. So I'm a part of our HR or employee success team. However, the leads for like global, like regional philanthropy, so like in London and APAC, those are all like ICs from like revenue or from the product team. So the budget lives underneath ES, but the individuals who come up with the ideas for the projects and stuff are from different departments. As well as a lot of it ties into like our reviews. And so we have like a community outreach individual who I work with. Her name is Claire. She's fabulous. So everyone has a hand in it, but for the most part, it lives underneath ES.
Hey, well, oh my gosh, thank you all so much. I know we're running up on time, so I just wanted to say thank you all for coming. For those of you who are still in here, thank you for listening, and a huge thank you to all the speakers who found time in their busy schedules to share their thoughts and their leadership approach on this topic. I hope everybody found this conversation to be valuable and insightful and can bring this back to your team extremely fired up. Percent Pledge, we focus on helping HR, culture, and people leaders build an authentic workplace, giving experience through social impact. So one that reflects empathy, genuinity, and change. If you're interested, we'd love to have a conversation on ways you can amplify your current or future giving programs and company impact missions. All right, anything else, Joel?
No, I think you covered it. And for folks that are still on here, if there's questions you have that haven't been answered or that we maybe missed in the chat, please reach out and let us know. We'll make sure that we can get feedback from the panelists. We know where they live. We'll go and get some answers for you. And then additionally, what we're going to be doing is putting together just some of the great insights that KP and Lilly and Meriem have shared throughout this conversation, and sharing with you all tomorrow kind of an action report. So walking through, here's what we talked about, here are some of the topics that are on most of your minds, and here are some of the actionable takeaways, the items that you can start to maybe implement within your organization right away. So thank you all again so much. Big shout out not only to Claire, the community engagement person who just got the shout out, but to KP and Lilly and Meriem for joining us for this this first webinar. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, y'all.